Hello, and welcome to the Break from the Bench series, hosted by the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges.
For good day, all. And we're saying good day because we know you all are from across the country. Welcome. I am retired Judge Karen Howes. I currently serve as judge in residence at the National Council. And my job is basically to support all the programs that the council produces and other products. I retired from the DC Superior Court, where over time as an attorney and as a judge, I also worked with folks who had disabilities, whether as clients or folks on my calendar. So that's enough about me. Let's now go to Jeanette Brickman.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeanette Brickman, and I work with the Vera Institute of Justice in the Center on Victimization and Safety. And within the Vera Institute, I have worked on the Accessing Safety Initiative for a few years now, where we serve communities who are federal OVW grantees who are working to better respond to victimization of people with disabilities within their community. And so within that role, we partnered with the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges to produce a curriculum that addresses exactly what the topic of conversation is today. So this is a very small piece of a much larger curriculum. So we're here to just kind of introduce that a little bit. With that, I would like Max to introduce himself. Max?
I'm Max. I am Outreach Director of Green Mountain Self-Advocates, which is a statewide disability rights organization here in Vermont.
Perfect. So I know time is of the essence. You all are taking a break from whatever else you are doing today. So we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to share my screen. Very limited slides today, but we do want to highlight certain features, and these are those. So we want to really make sure that there are some things that you really take away from today. Again, the first thing that I want to mention is that we did partner with NCJ/FCJ to create a curriculum, and as part of that curriculum, part of that curriculum development, we hosted numerous focus groups of judges within the NCJ/FCJ family, and certain themes of fear or misunderstanding came to light as we tried to learn what judges needed to know. What do they need to know? There were really pretty much no uniform response other than panic. What we see here, there was a little bit of panic when confronted with a situation that they really did not feel comfortable with. There was a lot of referral to someone else within the system. In other words, that this really isn't my issue to solve, despite the fact that I'm the judge in this courtroom. That encompassed about 60 to 70% of the responses that we heard from judges, that it was an expectation that understanding or quote unquote dealing with the issue of people with disability in their courtroom was not their problem to solve. And again, this reactionary or immediate panic mode, very common responses of referral to a guardian or the order of a guardian. A lot of use of legal ease where, oh, I would offer an accommodation, but what does that actually mean? How does that translate into understanding within your courtroom? And not a lot of understanding about how they would come to understand what accommodation is actually needed. How do they get to the right answer for that individual in front of them, not in even necessarily a global way? And then what accommodations are even available Sometimes that conversation was stilted or relatively not explored because a lot of the judges that we surveyed didn't have a lot of understanding of what accommodations were even available. So why were we doing this curriculum? Why are we here today? And why does any of this matter? I just want to give a little bit of grounding and foundation that people with intellectual, developmental, cognitive disability are assaulted at a rate of up to 7 times higher than people without disabilities. What's not counted are the approximately 373,000 people living in group homes. They're not even counted in those statistics. Usually it's by people they know are in positions of power. A lot of times it's based on this perception of a lack of credibility that someone with an intellectual or developmental disability will present to authorities or other people in power. This is very prevalent in the research that we did, this lack of credibility and the misperception. It sometimes comes very much due to a society-wide lack of understanding of people with disabilities and a lot of bias and stereotype buy-in. And then communication barriers that present themselves, and sometimes the lack of wanting to really dive in and dismantle those barriers and expect people to be accommodated into our system rather than meeting them where they are and what their needs are. Some common tactics for perpetrators: 44% of perpetrators of people with disability have a relationship with that individual. They are, in general, taking advantage of the lack of education that's provided to people with disabilities. And they're abusing trust. There's generally a trust relationship there, and oftentimes abuse of drug treatments as well. And finally, abuse of service animals and damage to assistive devices is quite common. That is just touching the surface of some of what we've learned and what we know to be true. And so at this point, I want Max to take over and explore when I mentioned stereotypes, biases, societal lack of understanding of people with disabilities. Max is going to present the sort of 3 levels of approach. So Max, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. So it is important to learn how society views about disability have changed over time. People's understanding of disability has varied from being something that was looked at as being bad to being another part of human diversity that makes this world so wonderful. Where we will discuss several views of disability. The medical model of disability is one view. And this model says disability is a medical problem in the body. It sees people with disabilities as broken, as a problem that needs to be fixed, as opposed to the environment needing to be adapted. We are often described as sick and weak, told that we need to be cured. The medical model gives decision-making power to professionals. This model sees the doctor as an expert. The focus is on finding a cure rather than on my needs. Disability is viewed as a personal problem, like it's my fault. Professionals are the only people who can make us fit into the mainstream society. The medical model often results in segregation. It led to the building of large institutions. People with disabilities were sent to live there with the idea of being cured. Instead, they became places where anyone with a disability might be locked up to prevent them from having kids or passing on their genetic traits. And overall, just being shunned from society. Now, of course, medical treatment can and has helped people with disabilities. In spite of this, searching for the right treatment to overcome my disability cannot be the sole focus of my life. Next slide. The next model I'm going to talk about is called the social model. The social model says that a disability is not something that a person has. You can just think about me as a person with autism. Oh, well, excuse me for a second. I meant to say that you can't just think of me as a person with autism. You need to also think about my surroundings. A person is more or less disabled based on what they can and cannot do in the many types of environments they encounter. So yes, a person with a disability may have trouble moving, seeing, hearing, speaking, or thinking, but their experience of disability can be decreased by adapting their world. The idea is to make some changes in their environment so a person can do more. So when we talk about making changes, you may have heard of this before, but we are talking about providing accommodations. The emphasis is on designing environments to accommodate people with all kinds of abilities. Now, here is how the social model, the social model compares to the medical model. The main focus of the social model is on my ability to function in the world, whereas the medical model, the focus is on my medical diagnosis. And accommodations are individualized. For example, you may have heard when you met one person with autism, you only know one person with autism. So the accommodations I need as a person with autism might be different than what someone else needs. Another important idea associated with the social model is that it looks at the experience of disability as an ordinary part of our human experience. The social model is a powerful idea that changes us all to come up with different ways to change the environment and provide accommodations. By doing this, we will meet people's needs and eliminate access barriers. Next slide. The last model I want to talk about is the disability justice model. We have rights, but people do not always respect our rights and choices. Our society is set up to make it hard for people with disabilities to use our rights. People with disabilities as a group are treated unfairly because of our disabilities. This is called ableism. Often people with disabilities often are left out because the world is not built with us in mind. A lot of buildings are built so wheelchair users can't get in. Newspapers are printed too small for people with low vision to read. It is so common for us to be left out that you might not even notice it is happening. Just like sexism and racism, um, people with disabilities as a group experience discrimination. Ableism is part of the fabric of our society. People are more likely to hurt or abuse people with disabilities. Some people think our disabilities make it okay to hurt us. If someone hurts us, people might not do anything about it. People might think we cannot make our own choices. They might treat us like kids even when we are adults. They might try to control our lives. Ableism is not just about how one person treats another. Being polite to people with disabilities, being polite to people with disabilities will not fix the problem. Ableism affects decisions people make about our lives. These decisions add up. Sometimes they turn into laws or programs that treat disabled people unfairly. We get segregated into institutions and sheltered workshops, and disabled people don't have the same chances in life. They might be kept apart from other people. Ableism can make disabled people feel bad. Next slide. So what can we do about eliminating ableism? You know, embrace nothing about us without us. Look to people with lived experience of disability to lead the way. Debunk the perfect body ideal. Expose the false idea of being normal. Insist on equity. Treat adults as adults. Use respectful language. Insist that people talk directly to the person, not their supporter. Start seeing and looking for ableism. Ask yourself what assumptions are being made about disability. Be watchful for false ideas about disability. Accept that disability is just another way for a mind and or body to be. Presume competence. Believe that all people with disabilities have abilities. Avoid making assumptions about what a person can and can't do. Most people with disabilities perform better than expected when others accept them to do well. Next slide.
So I think one thing that we wanted to add, Max, is if you could just touch on the dignity of risk. It's a phrase that we use a lot, and could you explain it?
Yeah, so for me, the dignity of risk means I can make a mistake. Like, I can make mistakes. And when I make a mistake, I will not be held to a higher standard. Sometimes people with disabilities are so scrutinized that we expect more from them than we do from someone who does not have a disability. In all of our work, we need to begin by asking what really matters to the person with a disability from their perspective. We need to see that there is a difference between what others think the person should do and what the person wants to do. So speaking as a person with autism, it is vital that decisions allow my life are based off, based on what is important to me from my perspective, instead of focusing on what others say is important for me. And just a last thing is just dignity of risk is allowing us to make mistakes and learn from ourselves. Because how are we going to pick ourselves up and put ourselves back on our feet if we don't fail somehow? And we shouldn't be held to a higher standard not to mess up versus people without disabilities.
Thank you so much. Judge House?
All right, are we ready to go to the questions and answers and bring this right into the courtroom? You all have given a lot of information about the rates of abuse and the various ways that our society approaches disability. I love the fact that Max talked about sexual abuse, older age-related abuse within this particular community and our society's responses that marginalize folks with disabilities. So moving on, I'd like to ask both of you, what do you see as the judge's role in ensuring the justice that Max talked about on a case-by-case basis? Jeanette?
So many things you can start doing today, and being really active in how you define your own role in the courtroom, whatever that may be. For judges, that's your courtroom. So this is ultimately your responsibility to ensure equity and fairness and justice, right? And possibly get yourself on a learning curve where you're becoming really comfortable with the tactics specific to domestic violence and sexual violence against people with disabilities. Not to diagnose and not to make any kind of decisions about what that means, but as the beginning of a conversation. A conversation of learning, getting on that learning curve. You have a duty to ensure fairness and equity. So let's try to figure out, what does that look like? It might look different for different people. What are they looking for? You're here on an NCJ, FCJ break from the bench. So you've shown an eagerness to learn. Keep it going and learn from the people, like Max said, nothing about us without us. Make sure you learn from the people who are the experts, and that is not the doctors. It is the people with lived experience. And also another tactic is to think less of your courtroom as a restaurant with a menu. It's not a set menu. Get creative, start asking, what are the other food items that might be behind the curtain? We don't have to be limited to what you've used in the past in terms of accommodation, but also recognizing the inherent ableism that is accommodations. We're asking people who have disabilities to enter, quote unquote, our world. Let's try to enter their world, like I mentioned, and learn from them what menu do they want to choose from, instead of presenting them with a menu of choices, and starting to get really matching whatever that accommodation is to the person in front of you, rather than the person that you saw 2 months ago where that accommodation worked really well for them. may not work well for the person in front of you. Max, do you have anything to add?
I would probably say, as I think of things here, I would say treat people how you want, how you would treat people with disabilities how you would treat anyone else. A person with a disability doesn't automatically need a guardian. Look at things like supported decision making. Just allow the person to be free to live life with, the dignity of risk, like I explained, and just get to know us, get in touch with your local self-advocacy like organization, if there is one, and ask them what they want to see or how they want to be treated in the courtroom.
All right, thanks, Max and Janet.
Really quick, one more thing that I would like to add is give yourselves all the credit that you deserve for shifting and pivoting and changing and accommodating and everything that we've done for the last year. We have shown ourselves to be flexible, and that just because it was always done one way, none of us followed that in 2020, right? For really anything. Take that attitude of flexibility and bring it into the courtroom and other avenues as well. And so I think we've shown ourselves to be capable of this. So let's now expand it where we can benefit more people. Sorry.
That's an excellent point, because we have had to pivot. All of the judges have had to do things differently that we wouldn't have even thought about. The remote hearings. That too can be something that is individualized so that people have more access and are not as stressed out and traumatized, particularly when we're talking about folks who have been victims or are survivors of domestic violence or sexual violence. I wonder whether you have any suggestions for specific things that the folks on this call can do beginning tomorrow.
Can do around shifting and pivoting and being more flexible?
More flexible, pivoting. We talk a lot about, and this is across case types, about engaging community, engaging the parties in a way that is different than we have always done it. So if I'm sitting in court today, what would you recommend if it was known that there was a person with disabilities in the courtroom? What could that judge do right then and there?
Ask. Go ahead, Matt.
I think the only thing I can think of in that is just understand that, actually, I can't speak for everybody with a disability, and I can't speak for everybody on the autism spectrum. Understand that the courtroom can be an intimidating place.
Mm-hmm.
So try to do what you can. And this is just my recommendation to not just judges, but even attorneys and anybody that works in the court system. Do what you can to make the environment feel less intimidating. And also make sure that what the individual is presented with is in a way that is accessible enough for them to understand.
I hear you saying, Max, that the way we communicate is also our language and not language that most people who come to court can understand. Legalese, that is not part of our common means of communication. And it doesn't have to seem as though people are being talked down to, because that's not, I think that was part of your message, that it's about respect and dignity and acknowledging that you are a whole person, regardless of any disability you might have.
Exactly.
All right, so
Questions.
go ahead.
specific questions. What do you need from me to understand this process a little bit better? Normalize the confusion, because like Max just said, it's intimidating for everyone. This is not a specific area for people with disability. This is one of those areas where if you make accommodations, it's only going to make it better for everybody. And so if you normalize the process of, okay, let's slow this down a little bit. Do I need to repeat myself? Do I need to explain this better? Do I need to change my behavior to meet you where you're at? Do we need to have better, plainer language within our system? Do I need to do a quick review of my courtroom and see what's disabling about it? Do I make rules that have really just form over function? A really good example that I learned from a judge in doing the curriculum was they learned from one litigant did not want to sit on the side of the courtroom that was always known to be the side that they felt very adamant they were more comfortable on that side of the courtroom. And the judge in that case said, well, I don't see any reason why I can't allow this person to sit on that side of the courtroom. And they just told me that's where they would prefer to be. It would make them more comfortable. Little things like that of what kind of rules are we forcing people to follow that are form over function and not comfort? Doing a little bit of that, kind of self-reflection on what is our courtroom like. Some of it's meant to intimidate. Let's be really honest there. It's meant to intimidate. But let's find out where we can lift some of that and allow the understanding of the events that are happening to unfold in a way that doesn't intentionally confuse someone. Ask more open-ended questions. Yes, no questions can be difficult for people with cognitive and intellectual disability, where this cultural compliance that they've been subjected to their whole life, this culture of compliance where they are expected to say yes, because if they say yes, they're making someone happy. So they're going to say that they understand something when maybe they don't. Maybe you need to check on understanding. And so, this notion of just asking more open-ended questions, I think is a good tactic as well. So various strategies like that you want to pay attention to, things that you can change, tomorrow. Partner with experts in your community, reach out to them and find them and learn from them.
I'm glad you raised the point about experts in the community, because really we've been talking throughout this session about access to justice and procedural justice. And I mean, it has its principles, and both of you have set out those principles: understanding, dignity, respect, no bias. And I think the next question that I'd like to see if you can respond to is, how do you bring this in a wider arena than the courtroom itself that each judge sits? We use coordinated community response in domestic violence and have for years. How would the disability community be included in those processes so that the court system, the justice system, can determine that fairness is happening, access is happening, and ensure that it always is on the table from a structural standpoint, not just the workings of an individual judge?
Start on answering that question and refer right back to what Max said earlier. These discussions become policy becomes law. So it's really important that if at any point your conversation is turning to disability, there better be someone in the room that is affected by it. And if your conversations aren't including disability, why not? Because 1 in 4 Americans have a disability. And sometimes they're hidden. Not everybody is announcing to the world that they have a disability. And sometimes they have a reason for that. We're not expecting everyone to announce their disability status before every single meeting. But if issues around disability aren't coming up, I would be wondering why. Because it is prevalent, it's affecting almost all of us. Many of us will age into disability. Many of us are born with disability. And so if we're not having it as a normal discussion when we're discussing any kind of policy, community-based or system-based, that should give you pause. That you should be wondering, why are these discussions not happening? Because we're going to be making some bad law and some bad policy without that.
Max, did you have something you wanted to add?
I think I echo what Janet Brickman said.
Okay. I wonder what you would want the folks who are with us today, each of you, what would be the takeaway that you would give to them? The challenge that you give to them? It's the whole conversation, but pick the highest point.
Next, do you want to start?
I think I'll say it again, but presume competence. Give people with presume competence. Don't assume what we can or cannot do. Nothing about us without us. Whenever decisions are being made about our lives, we need to be at the table 100% and taken seriously. I would say give people with disabilities equity. Give us the respect that we deserve. Equality is one thing, but equity is another.
Great point. Great point.
Yeah, and to echo what Max just said, inclusion is one thing, belonging is another. That being invited into the room, it has to be a meaningful invitation. Just being included isn't enough. I mean, that's become the word that people are using. And somebody challenged me not that long ago, and I love it, that it's not the same. Inclusion and belonging are not the same. People with disabilities belong in the room. They belong there. They have a voice that are the experts. We don't require them to announce their disability, but it's incredibly powerful to have that voice in the room. So when people are self-advocates and are out there being the voice, that they're heard, believed, understood. Nothing about us without us, I think, cannot be overstated. That there should never be a meeting that's happening that discusses accommodations without people with disabilities in the room. And then this presumption of competence, I think, is a huge piece. When Max said that earlier, I thought, there's the social construct of presumed competence, and then there's the legal construct of presumed competence. And I think that it's equally important in both.
All right, thank you very much. Jennifer?
This project was supported by grant number 2016 TA-ACTS K026 awarded by the Office on Violence Against Women, U.S. Department of Justice. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this publication/program/exhibition are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. Department of Justice. The recipient also agrees to ensure that any subrecipient and any tier will comply with this condition. National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. NCJFCJ. www.ncjfcj.org